Welcome one and all, panelists, attendees, and designated eavesdroppers. The panel before us seeks to address the issue of the likely future of humanity. Now, you know you're in trouble when a runaway present slams into an onrushing future with the full force of a thunderclap. That's where we are today. All the forces we have all known about since World War II have been steadily accumulating right before us for decades and are now coming to a crashing head. What are they? Well, the usual: nuclear arms, climate change, and that top of the charts favorite of our species, war. In fact, many perspicacious see World War III as already in motion. So don't wait for the media to announce it. Otherwise, it might go something like this: the world ends tonight at 9, details at 11. Instead, survey its scope in what's about you today: genocide, ethnocide, and ecocide. The hoi polloi have nothing to do with any of these crises. The power elites are in deep in all of them. So, does humanity have a future? I'll give you a couple of seconds to hold your breath. No. We knew that when they split the atom, easily the most fiendish act in the history of humankind, especially when you know why they were anxious to do so. Doom is now only a matter of time, not whether, but when. But that's just my personal reckoning. Perhaps this panel might offset such prognostications and convince us otherwise. Maybe echoing the poet who wrote, "Say not the struggle not availeth," and though our hopes turned out to be dupes, could be that our fears may also turn out to be liars. Maybe, maybe not. The issue is not one of being optimistic or pessimistic. Those are usually just attitudes of the unlettered. We as scholars need always be realists, that is, fact-based. Dreams are not for the woke. So who are our panelists then? All distinguished scholars in multiple fields: Professors Fadhel Kaboub, Radhika Desai, Michelle Bones, Genevieve Vaughn, Ruth Nyambura, and Guy McPherson. The modus operandi: each panelist is posed a two-part query in 2 separate rounds of questioning. Then we'll hold a brief cross-conversation with a view to elucidate and clarify matters. At some point within this melee, I'm just joking, last and always least, I will intrude with my own 2 little red cents. Let me close now with a snatch of verse that I wrote in 2017, but which I think fits this occasion. It's titled Augury. Neither a moon of our delight, nor a prince of darkest night. Is it eclipse or ellipsis? No one can really say. The times they are will all distray. Judgment long has fled away. To protest too is quite outré, for every dog must have its day. The stage is set, the die is cast. No link there be to remembrance past. Main Street torpid drags along. Wall Street turbid admits no wrong. History is over, the game is clear. Soothsayers say the end is near. We may not smile nor shed a tear. Hope all dead, what's left is fear. So woe betide, alack, alas. Dare we hope this too shall pass? Dare we hope this too shall pass? So with those cheerful words, let's start things off. I will request each panelist to just take a couple of seconds off to tell us what you do, since I am not fully apprised, I may not be accurate there prior to speaking. You're such a fantastic panel that I sort of wonder what I'm doing on it. I lied. I said I'll contribute my 2 little red cents. Now it's going to be a lot more than that, at least worth a wooden nickel, I think. But more seriously, I worked on these ideas that I'm about to present for the last 35 years on my own, away from the academy. And it's a critique of Eurocentrism at large. So I'll begin without any further ado. And I'll go a little bit faster than usual in order to keep to the same time as all of you. I'm just combining the 5 and 10 that you have into one 15-minute slot. So I'll be answering the same 2 queries, but from within a foundational analysis that questions all of received social theory. For some 2 centuries, most of the world has toiled under the spell of European ideas and institutions. It is a sea we swim and drown in. I have titled that corpus of received thinking Euro-modernism, EM for short, the genre of modernism that Europe imposed first on itself and then on the worlds it conquered. I have sought in my work to redress that imbalance, and what follows in desperate brevity is a transcendent critique, accent on the adjective, transcendent critique of Eurocentric paradigms. It is a verifiable and realist amendment and supplement to all of modernist societal speculations. Man is born free and everywhere is in chains, gushed Rousseau somewhere in 1762, which is emblematically a Eurocentric, Euro-modernist, crypto-Judeo-Christian Enlightenment trope with absolutely no ontic foundation. No, humans are not born free to be or become this or that as they please. That is the feint that has bedeviled the Euro-modernist world ever since. It is the basis for all the historical traumas of EM societies, imagining they could be anything they wish to be except what they actually are. Note the paradox. The promise of some or other fanciful utopia dangled as the eternal carrot, obscuring the contra-reality of a grim, stark, oppressive wasteland. Note also that the entire panoply of EM strictures was never voted in by majority vote or popular acclaim, but imposed perforce, first in Europe and then globally. Stripped of its modernist veils, societal life becomes limpidly transparent. So who are we? We are hominids, close cousins to chimps, sharing 99% of our genes with them. And we cannot be nor do a whole lot better or worse than that. Let me sketch matters in a laundry list fashion. We are like so many mammals, pack and herd animals. We are best equipped to function in families, clans, and tribes, which are surrogates for the above. In Gemeinschaft, not Gesellschaft groupings, i.e. small face-to-face personal settings rather than the impersonal large-scale units that we are accustomed to. In fact, we are naturally, and I'll use that term advisedly throughout, tribalist in all our doings. We belong, again, naturally, not to a political economy of interests, which is the banal modernist conceit, but to a rich, moral community of primal affections. This is critical because EM agendas, left or right, evolved under the governing geist of materialism, which was back then the best physics of its time. Not anymore. Aside from its being bad morals, bad theology, and bad philosophy, materialism is also bad science, if one is acquainted even marginally with quantum physics. Matter is no longer prima materia. It was replaced by its dual energy under relativism, and both got subsumed within the notion of the field in quantum field theory. At any rate, our highest need as mammals may not be to build billionaire fortunes, or cathedrals, or compose violin concertos, or fabricate fanciful Arcadias, but far more mundanely and simply what we observe sea lions doing, to huddle. We are heat seekers, not light seekers. The foundational urges of human society are biological, cultural, and moral, not materialist. A human society is inexorably a moral amalgam, an idea totally alien to Euro-modernist reductionism. Human values are qualitative, not quantitative. Little wonder that we rot and decay in this age of quantity, gloriously initiated and glorified by Euro-modernists. Once severed and uprooted from the healing ethos of our social matrix, we fall prey to the pangs of angst, alienation, and anomie, and morph in due time into the now ubiquitous run of sociopaths and psychopaths. That is what European modernism has achieved. And that is why we find ourselves where we are today, adrift far, far from our vital affective moorings. And we will face total societal atrophy in a Hobbesian bellum omnium contra omnes scenario if we persist on this path. The more advanced a society is along this EM trajectory, the more it will exhibit such traits, which explains the US today quite succinctly. Indeed, I've termed it the world's first amoral society, which is a true contradiction in terms, where increasingly anything goes in a fitful state of post-human, post-truth, post-moral derangement. To continue, behaviorally speaking, human males appear to take after chimps, females after bonobos. The former possessed of instinctual violence, yen for domination, the latter instinctual nurturance. Yes, all sentient life on this planet is instinctually governed, and we are no exception. Instincts in EM ideology are deemed to be irrelevant to humans, though necessary to understand animal behavior. Levi-Strauss once said, instincts explain nothing. Why this strange dualism? Why this split? Possibly, in fact, obviously, because of the latent Judeo-Christian notion that we, unlike mere animals, are cast in the image of God, unless you happen to be non-Europeans, whence you were called literally natur folk, translate primitive, more accurately, savage people. Darwin's monumental correction, which I see as the crown jewel of European science, came far too late and was protested vehemently even to this day. Now, civilization begins when two baseline conditions are satisfied. One, when the natural world is tamed, domesticated, pacified, which men and women both collaborate in. And two, when the societal world is similarly stabilized, that is, men and male violence are tamed, domesticated, and pacified by women, so children can be reared safely, safe, that is, away from male predations. As progenitors and initial food providers, it is women who are thereby, of necessity, the first and original peacekeepers. They do this by enchaining the aggressive impulses of males in emotive coils of domesticity, which makes both for intra-tribal safety and also creates a vital cordon sanitaire for raising the otherwise highly vulnerable human infant. By the way, no other stratagem has ever worked any better. Yet in the long run, given their quote-unquote animal spirits, males break away from the restraints of simple tribal society and go on in time to found empires that we know all too well. So basically, war is the near permanent condition of our species. In a fit of rash modesty, I term it Kanth's law. But think about that. War is our permanent condition. So let us not affect surprise when we see it happening all around us, as we have throughout history. Much gets clarified in this perspective. For example, what we understand in modern parlance, or modernist parlance, as racism, is oft leastways at base a tribal reaction to the other, varying in scope and intensity depending on circumstances. However, European racism has a slightly deeper, darker provenance. It stems not least from the perhaps not entirely irrational fear that so-called miscegenation, don't they come up with wonderful words? This used to be quite common until recently, that is, racial intermarriage, would make some unique traits of Europeans, blonde hair, blue eyes, for example, vanish from the face of the earth along with them. So we may need to re-examine all EM notions of race, gender, state, nation, individualism, democracy, etc., as I'm doing and as I've done. In fact, the entire loaded vocabulary of EM may have to be reviewed as misguided and misleading. To press on. Once freed of tribal restraints, our natural tendency is oligarchy, towards which all political systems gravitate regardless of what they think they are. And state and nation, those two concepts conjoined as the nation state, key EM innovations, was consecrated roughly in 1648 at the Treaty of Westphalia, correspond to no requisite need of the human race, but are imposed artifacts by governing elites to affirm and consolidate power. Besides, EM structures are willfully organized adversarially, be it in the legal or political arena, requiring us to be disaffected and distrustful of one another at all times. The asocial individual, that's the real AI we should worry about, stripped of all culture, community ties, is another unique EM construction and a pretty feckless creature. By the way, the non-European world has never been able to wholly entertain, accept, or even sacralize such a freakish character. Groveling in desperate loneliness, and yet Jean-Paul Sartre, sipping his espresso on the Rue Gauche, could still moan that hell is other people, craving community and connection, but losing herself in surrogate, sordid satisfactions that only take her down the primrose path of accumulating an irreparable misery and aphasia. No wonder that the UK recently created a minister for loneliness. What a striking admission of an utterly failed society. So EM turns a band of wannabe convivials into a sullen company of strangers. You don't know what that means, sullen company of strangers? Take a ride on the New York City subway. Equally untenable are the facile utopias be it so-called communism or its antipode, the so-called free society. They will and have all failed and floundered, more or less empirically, on the reef of inescapable male power struggles. For there is an iron law of oligarchy that prevails in the domain of power that is simply ineluctable. To sum up, we are animals. Forget the self-dignifying Homo sapiens sapiens hype. And we inhabit a societal jungle. And nature, and like nature herself, are glaringly red in tooth and claw. No, biology is not destiny. That is not what I'm saying. But neither can it be dismissed as irrelevant. At times, freedom is only imaginable with the prior recognition of necessity. If we are beset perennially by war and violence, and tell me when we have not, it is because human males are programmed for these traits. That is why, as people have observed throughout the ages, nothing really changes. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. And note that life is as dangerous today in 21st century United States, where the populace is inured from harm, not by the curated civilities of custom, culture, and convention, but much more mundanely by Smith and Wesson, more or less as Europe itself was in medieval times. Besides, wherever abound more guns than citizenry is not a civilization, but a brutish morass of imminent tension and imminent terror, as the impuissant well know. So much for the EM myth of progress. Yet there's always been a real and realized alternative to these fractious modernist templates. It is that old, pre-existing other way, the perennial self that simple tribal societies cemented when our species began its long odyssey eons ago. And what is that? Living swathed in mutual affections amongst kith and kin, be that kinship real or ersatz. Social life, like all life on the planet, is spontaneously engendered. It requires no direction, no organization. Yet all the elaborate social engineering that EM policy manifests are redolent with, be they of left or right, demand harsh compulsion. Why? Because they have to force us to go against the grain of who we are. Now, John Stuart Mill is considered to be a patron saint of liberty, and yet he's the one who wrote, "It is all right to force people to be free." Think about that. It's all right to force people to be free. Maybe George Bush was thinking of that when he took us into Iraq. So whence the compulsion? To school us away from being naturally cooperative convivials into the mold of what? Canny, calculating, self-seeking, acquisitive automaton. And that is the species that populate the bizarro world of microeconomics. By the way, economics is not a science, but a pathetically obvious see-through EM policy instruction manual. Economics, as I've said elsewhere, is a self-referential language game with zero representational efficacy. So we are taught in modernism to shun one another. Why? Lest we might anytime, if left to ourselves, build genuine human communities. What are they? I'll say it again. Face-to-face, organic commonwealths of micro-relations in small village-like communal settings. The Australian Aboriginals are just one amongst many such glittering examples. That is our natural, affective, communitarian habitat beyond the materialist quagmires of capitalism and socialism, which dispenses with the entire top-down corruptions of nations, states, and multinational enterprises that dog our lives, and could return us to a latter-day variation of our original tribal template, embodying its essential traits. By the way, this requires no tutoring, no political agitation, no force, just a welcome relapse into a spontaneous rediscovery once we see through the sham. Then and only then we stand a chance of survival. Nonetheless, we must not idealize this tribalist state of affairs I refer to. It is no utopia. In fact, that word itself is a modernist canard. Recall again, we are sprung from primal ooze. What scope is there for idyllic daydreams of any kind? But rather that the ethos of tribal amity is our original natural state of being, where we have reasonably adjusted to our environs, given our instinctual drives, posing little or no threat to nature or to others. Failing that, we are destined to go the way of the dodo and the dinosaur. But why should we complain, even if we were? 99% of all species that have ever lived have gone extinct. What is so darn special about us? As Carl Sagan said it, extinction is the rule, survival is the exception on this planet. And as I say it, we're here not to linger, but to leave, individually and collectively. In closing, let me highlight, and this is important, the striking difference between real natural institutions and artificial make-believe imposed ones. And I'm reminded of this because of my late friend Roy Bhaskar. One of the important things he said was that people understand things less by analysis, but by contrast, perhaps because of the way our binary logic systems work. Take the human family. It is a natural institution and obeys not one single Euro-modernist stipulation. It is neither free, nor individualist, nor egalitarian, nor democratic. But, and it's a great big but, it gives humans that vital, effective sanctuary for which there is no modernist substitute, none. Compare it to this EM artifact called, quote unquote, a nation. You have to pay or propagandize people to sacrifice for a nation. You don't have to brainwash a mother to save a child falling into harm's way. That's the difference between real and natural institutions and artificial imposed structures. I will hope that this is educational. And I also hope that we can now begin to glean how we have all been living factitious, synthetic, unrequited lives, decoyed far away from the felt needs of our own innate species being. Thank you.